everybody, and welcome to the Positively Disney podcast. This is podcast number 97, and I'm so excited. I can't believe 97 already. I never in a million years thought I don't know what I thought actually. But anyways, welcome from sunny Seattle. I'm Kimberly Bouchard, your host and the author of the Positively Disney book series. And I'm so excited to have my guest on tonight. It's just a subject matter that I've actually not been very familiar with Walt's work during the war years and all that, but I'll get to that in a moment. I want to welcome all my Facebook folks and the Twitch TV fans out there, and I want to give a special thanks to my sponsor, Michelle McKeown over at Years of Experience. If you want a wonderful vacation booked for you, whether it's this year, this fall, next year, she is great at providing everything that you want in your to-do list and places to go. And you even get texting privileges from her while you are on your vacation. Just tell her that I sent you, and you can reach her at MMCKEOWN at themouseexperts.com, or you can give her a call at 732-735-1779. Well, I'm not sure if all of you have been seeing some of the events that are coming up with Disney and sort of some history in Disney, but this week on the 20th, Disney Springs opens. Not everything in Disney Springs will open, but that sure gave me hope, and I really wish I could be there. But I just wish anybody that's going to stay safe, be well, and I'd love to hear from you. It's going to be a wonderful time for you guys, and kind of getting back into the Disney fun in the sun. Another thing that happened 29 years ago, it's hard to believe, a couple of days ago, the Muppet 3D Vision celebrated its 29th anniversary at what was known as MGM Studios. You guys all remember that name, right? Well, I was very fortunate when I was living in Canada at the time to go see it in 1992 with my future husband, who first introduced me to Walt Disney World. It was that trip that I absolutely fell in love with that park. Anyways, I love the Muppets. I am so much a fan of them that I forget how much I miss them until I go back every time to that attraction. And Kermit, Miss Piggy, even Rizzo the rat, who pretends to be Mickey Mouse in that pre-show, is just a hoot. And of course, who can't forget the two old guys? That it's really fun because they are kind of breaking the fourth wall, admitting that they are actually pegged down in the or screwed down in their chairs, and they can't really move. And I just love it. And I don't know if you guys have ever had an opportunity to sit in the front row or second row, but if you can, try to get the front row, because that's where you will see the interactions of the penguins. The orchestra is the penguins, and their reactions to things is absolutely hilarious, and it kind of distracts you a little bit from the show because they are just so fun. Who doesn't like the penguins, after all? I mean, in any way, shape, or form. But anyways, I just love that attraction, and I hope they never ever get rid of it. And even just the pre-shows. I mean, Disney's so great about pre-shows as well, of course, for everybody waiting for the new show, and the details and the gags and just the good fun. I love it. So I can't wait to go back to that attraction, but I just thought I'd share that with you. 29 years. So oh my gosh, before I go on, I want to welcome my husband and John Harrison Little. So welcome to the show. And my guest, David Lesjak, is also tuned in. And I'm very excited to also share with you guys that because I'm Canadian, today is actually Victoria Day. And I'll never forget the first time, our first May, that when we were here in 2012. And I couldn't figure out, I thought everybody in North America celebrated the same May long weekend. But as it turns out, Canada celebrates a May long weekend in May, the third week of May, and then we get to celebrate it here the last week. But ours in the US is Memorial Day, while the one in Canada is Victoria Day, giving a nod to Queen Victoria from years ago. Well, without further ado, I want to talk to you a little bit about my guest before we give him a call. This fellow is just an amazing human who has done so much, and his love for Disney, Walt Disney particularly, has really come out in his research of decades of research. He has a very big interest, particularly in the pre 1945 years, so the 1930s and the war years, and how Walt Disney contributed to those war years, as well as just little things that you and I generally wouldn't know about Walt. And he has, I would love to see this sometime. He has original archive photos of Walt, original press photos of Walt Disney, as well as almost 6,000 newspaper, magazine, and audio files. Can you imagine? All on that period of time. So I would consider him an expert in the area, and he is really fun to talk to and has a lot of different stories to share with us. So we're going to get him on the line. And I'm very fortunate. I met David through our local Disneyana club, and he happens to live a couple hours away from me in Vancouver, Canada area. So we're just getting him on the phone. Hi, David. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi, Kim. Happy Victoria Day to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you guys are enjoying a day, and I would assume you have the day off today, sort of. Yes.
I have the day off of work, and it's a beautiful sunny day today.
Yeah, that's nice. You guys are getting the same weather that we are, for sure. David, I still can't believe our conversation that we had a few weeks ago. How amazing the work that you have done, the research, the information gathering accumulated over the years. And I mean, your interest in Walt Disney, particularly the World War II era, began over 3 decades ago. That's a lot of research going on. What inspired you?
You're giving away my age.
Oh, no. You started when you were 6, right?
No, yeah, I wish.
Yeah.
I started collecting Disney artifacts in 1981 in my senior year of high school.
Okay.
That's when the bug first bit me, and then it just progressed and became the hobby that it is now.
Okay, so now when you say artifacts, what kind of artifacts are we talking about that you had started gathering?
Sure. So in my collection right now, I have roughly 300 plus, probably around 350 1930s Mickey Mouse items. Okay. So toys, postcards, a lot of Christmas stuff, the 1930s theater-based Mickey Mouse Club, disc figurines, storybooks, premiums, that sort of thing. Wow. And then I also have what I believe to be one of the world's largest collections of Disney World War II related memorabilia. I have probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 to 300 items in that genre.
Wow.
That includes original insignia artwork. It includes a lot of things that the studio did on the home front.
Okay.
And then my third collection, I have a fairly large collection of original Walt Disney press photographs from the 1930s and the 1940s as well. Wow. Not to mention the archive I have of roughly 6,000 magazine, newspaper, journal articles, and audio files.
That's crazy. Honestly, I think
it is crazy. That's what my wife said.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. I meant crazy in a good way. So I'm wondering. So, what had you home in onto the World War II era? Because I mean, there's a lot of Disney stuff out there. So, what was it in that particular era that drew you to it?
Yeah, so for the 1930s stuff, I like that stuff because that was when the studio was just sort of starting up, and Walt and his artists were doing all of these innovations, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then for the World War II stuff, when I was growing up, my next door neighbor, he was a combat veteran of World War II. He served in a Canadian artillery regiment that saw extensive action in Italy during the war, and he regaled me with stories of his adventures overseas. And from that point, I would go to the library and just start, I would take out every single book on World War II history. Mm. And my World War II reference library right now is huge. It's absolutely huge.
Oh, I bet.
But and that led to me actually doing a lot of work for World War II magazine. I used to interview World War II veterans about their experiences, and I would write cover
Oh,
stories, feature stories. I contributed to a column. And
okay.
then in the early days when I was collecting the 1930s Mickey Mouse stuff, I got a
Hmm.
reference book called Disneyana by an author named Cecil Muncie.
Mm.
And it contained a whole chapter on Disney's involvement in the war. Now, it didn't go into things in depth, but it
Hmm.
still piqued my interest. And
Yeah.
then at that point in time, besides the 30s Mickey Mouse stuff, I started searching out items related to the studio's contributions during the war.
Gee, I'm just thinking that it's so funny how things happen in the sense that if your neighbor had not served, you might not have started, gathering information or learning about that particular era, like that's
Yeah,
really neat.
that's absolutely true. That's
Yeah.
absolutely true.
So, David, I mean, where in the world do you find your things? I mean, there's all kinds of people that like to collect things. I like to collect things, but nowhere, like not even a grain of salt compared to you. But where do you get these things?
Well, back in the old days
Oh,
when I,
okay.
used to walk to school barefoot in the snow
Uh,
uphill in both directions,
oh, yeah.
you would get you would get sales lists from people. People would advertise in the antique trader. I used to
Okay.
belong to the Mouse Club and the National Fantasy Fan Club, and they would each have conventions every year with big ballrooms filled with things for sale. And then up here in Canada, I would just go to garage sales and flea markets, and the drive-ins would have the flea market on the Sunday. My neighbors
Mm.
ran an antique and collectible store, so I would go out with them all the time
Oh,
when they went out looking for things
okay.
for their store. I would hop along and join them and look for stuff for my Disney collection. One of the neatest things that ever happened to me was back in 1983. I went to a cartoon festival in
Oh,
Victoria, British Columbia.
oh, yeah.
And while I was there, I met an interesting gentleman in Seattle whose name is Dennis Books. He had a big portfolio of artwork, and he was selling it, walking around selling it. And we
Oh,
struck up a friendship, and he's been my friend ever since, so 30 plus years.
oh,
He has one of the largest collections of Disney memorabilia ever. Like his art collection numbers over 1,000 pieces, and then he
wow.
has display cases filled with hundreds and hundreds of bisque figurines, rubber figurines, prototype dolls. He has archival binders filled with paper ephemera.
Wow.
It's just an outstanding collection. So he
Wow.
was sort of my mentor as well along the way. He taught me a lot about Disney artwork and some of the early Disney history, and really piqued my interest further.
My goodness. So what are some of your discoveries that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I have a lot of rare items in my collection. So one item that's really neat is a Mickey Mouse gas mask carrying tin that was made for children in England in 1941 by a Disney licensee called Happy Knack. And that's really cool. It's got graphics of Mickey Mouse on the tin wearing a gas mask,
Wow.
and he's frightened. He's frightened his three nephews.
Oh,
There's three nephews or three little mice children shown on the tin as well, and one of
okay.
them thinks he's a grizzly bear, and the other one says, no, 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 it's just Uncle Mickey. And this tin
Ah.
was used for during the war.
Mhm.
Children in England would carry this. It had a string with two little eyelets, so they would carry it around their shoulders, and
Okay.
it contained the children's gas mask. So
Wow.
that's a really neat item. There's only about
Wow.
six of those, I think, known to exist, five or six. And out of the ones that I know about, mine is in probably the second best condition.
Wow.
I've got a really neat memo that was written by Walt Disney just a few days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor,
Mm.
and in it he tells people, they've instituted basically an emergency preparedness program, and it's up to them to pay attention to what the air raid wardens and the safety wardens say when there's an evacuation drill, because they've been trained and everybody needs to follow the proper protocol. I've got a really neat studio identification pin from the war. There's only about four or five known in the marketplace. The one that I have was for a gentleman that was in the cutting department, the editing department.
Mhm.
The pins were issued in June of 1942 because the studio was named a war plant, so everybody had to wear an identification pin to get into
Oh,
the studio.
okay.
And they had Coast Guard members patrol the studio lot as security because of all the top secret material that the studio was producing during the war. So those
Sure.
are a few neat things. I've got some really cool pieces of artwork. I have a piece of artwork that was actually given to me by a World War II veteran named Virgil Greer. He
Mm,
served aboard the USS Escambia,
right.
which was a fast fleet refueler. It served in the South Pacific. Because it's a refueler, artist Hank Porter, the illustration he created,
Right.
he's got Jose Carioca standing atop a floating 50-gallon drum, and on top of it is a gravity-fed gas pump, and Jose's
Ah,
holding the handle of the gas pump in one hand, the nozzle. I interviewed Virgil. I
oh,
tracked him down because I saw on the internet that his ship had a Disney designed insignia. So I just struck up a
oh,
conversation with him because I wanted to know the history of the ship and how why they wanted an insignia and how that all came about.
yeah.
And we became fast friends and maintained a friendship for many years. And then out of the blue one year, I got an email from his daughter saying that her dad had passed away.
Oh,
He had been diagnosed with throat cancer, and he passed away about 2 weeks later. And
wow.
so she said, my dad wanted you to have the piece of artwork. And so she sent me the piece of artwork, and it's beautiful. It's a watercolor, a finished watercolor piece.
Hmm.
And then she also sent me. He was trained at the Hutchinson Naval Air Station. That's where a lot of naval guys went to get their training.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was at the base, he was a yeoman, and he was in charge of editing the base newsletter. Well, it turns out that that base also had a Disney-designed insignia, and it's
Oh,
Jiminy Cricket flying an airplane with an anchor trailing behind it. And the first
oh,
time they used that was in December 1942. They published it on the cover of their Christmas issue of the newsletter. So she
wow.
sent me that. And
Gee.
then another poignant thing that she did was she sent me a ceramic figurine of Jose Carioca, and the story behind that. And he had told me the story. His wife gave it to him when they were in San Francisco, just as he was shipping out. And so
Oh,
he carried that piece with him on the ship throughout the war.
oh,
And when they were in the South Pacific,
yeah.
they were in the middle of a typhoon, and the
Oh.
typhoon knocked the figurine off of his desk. He glued the foot back on, and then he jokingly told me that he thought Jose should get a Purple Heart because he'd been wounded in combat.
Yeah.
So, so
Oh
it's,
my
it's very
gosh.
poignant because he
Yeah.
gave me not only two really neat Disney items, but the third item was an item that his wife had actually given him when he had shipped out, and it too
Yeah.
just happens to be a Disney piece. So,
Oh,
they're
wonderful.
treasured. They're definitely treasured parts of my collection, and
For sure.
I talk about the history of the boat any chance that I can get,
Mm-hmm.
and I share his memories. So it's a way of
Oh,
honoring him and his service.
right. Absolutely. And I noticed that, I mean, Mickey's got my heart, but Donald Duck is my guy. And I noticed that there is a lot of Donald Duck involved in the war stuff.
Yes.
Do you have any of that, or know any of the history behind Donald Duck and that?
Well, yeah, I do have pieces featuring Donald Duck. I have a lot of pieces in my collection,
Okay.
uh, World War II related, that feature Donald. I've
Okay.
got a Victory Garden sign with him on it. There's several publications that were done for military installations for their Christmas, their Christmas dinner. The American Women's Voluntary Service, Hank Porter, Disney artist, he did an illustration of Donald Duck dressed as Santa Claus.
Oh,
They printed it on a postcard
yeah.
that they used as a fundraiser.
Okay.
One of the really neat pieces of Donald Duck World War II artifacts that I have is a postcard that was sent from the infamous Stalag Luft 3 prisoner of war camp
Wow.
by a B-17 bombardier by the name of Emmett Cook Sr. His plane was shot down in June of 1943 during a raid over Palermo Harbor in Italy,
Wow. Wow.
and several men aboard they called them ships, but it was a bomber. But
Right.
several men aboard his ship didn't survive being shot down.
Oh.
He was picked up and incarcerated at Stalag Luft 3, and while he was there, he did an illustration on a postcard that he sent to his mother, and it's Donald Duck behind jail bars, and the caption
Ah.
says, Stalag Luft 3, which was the name of the prisoner of war camp,
Right.
and then below the illustration it says, I wanted wings. And what most of the airmen did is if they were shot down and captured, they would take their Air Force insignia, their wings, and
Right.
they would clip part of the wing off because they were now grounded. But
Oh.
it's a really neat postcard. He gave it to me out of the blue one day. I had been advertising in prisoner of war publications looking for the creator of that design because Walt Disney received a postcard from another airman named Robert Bishop. Robert Bishop drew his version of that illustration on a postcard, sent it to his girlfriend in Carolina. She sent it to Walt Disney because Robert Bishop wanted some patches made up of the design. And so I always thought that Robert Bishop had done the design, but no, it was Emmett Cook created the original, and it created such a stir in the camp that everybody started copying it, or they were asking him to draw it in their YMCA diaries or on postcards that they sent home to their wives or girlfriends.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So now I think you sent me one. I posted one. That's the postcard, isn't it?
That's the postcard. That's the postcard. Yeah, and
wow.
he sent me high resolution scans of it and a patch that he had made of the same design while he was in the camp. Wow. And then I thought, I said that was really cool, and he gave me the whole history, and I interviewed him about his war history. We became friends, and then out of the blue, I get a Easter card from him, and inside is the postcard. So I said, jeepers, Emmett, that's really cool. I said, I'll take a picture of it and I'll return it to you right away. Right. And he said, no. He goes, my family's not interested in this stuff. He says, I want you to have it.
Wow.
And I almost started crying because I was so touched that he would think to give that to me. And he actually participated in the so-called Great Escape. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with the movie starring Steve McQueen and Charles Bronson and James Garner. Yeah. Well, he was actually part of the process that planned that escape.
Oh my!
So to have something from that historically important prisoner of war camp, and from a veteran that survived the war, it's really special.
Amazing! My gosh, you're you are holding a piece of history in your hand. Oh my word. That's incredible. I just get chills when you tell me that. It's just unbelievable. I'm so grateful that you sent me that to post, because it has so much meaning as wow, and to be able to have spoken with him too. I mean, that's such a rarity, David. Honestly, it really is. I mean,
and what I do is I don't ask people for things. I don't,
I know.
I contact them so I can get the history behind the piece, and then if they happen to be a World War II veteran, I interview them about their war experience, because once they pass away, then that history is lost.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's really interesting because, like I said, I've interviewed at least 40 World War II veterans about their experiences, and all of them have passed on.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
And the one that really bugs me, he wasn't not in any way Disney related, but he was. I was at the grocery store one day in the banana section, and I see a gentleman wearing a burgundy sweater with a Royal Canadian Legion crest on it.
Yeah.
And I said to him, "Oh, you're airborne." He goes, "How'd you know that?" I said, "Well, airborne, that burgundy color, that's the color of the airborne." He goes, "Yeah, you're right." And I said, I don't want to offend you, but were you Korea or World War II? He goes, "No, World War II." I said,
wow.
I said, "Did you see action?" And he goes, "Son, I was in the graduating class, the first graduating class of paratroopers." And I said, "Oh, wow." I said, so I said, "You dropped on Normandy?" "Yes." "You dropped in Operation Market Garden up in Holland?" "Yes." "You dropped on the Rhine River?" "Yes."
Oh my gosh.
I said, "Wow." I said, "I would love to interview you. I'm sure you have some interesting history."
Yeah.
And he started to cry. And I felt so bad. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir." I said, I didn't mean to make you cry. And he goes, No. He goes, "Young man, it's not your fault." He said, "I just lost too many good friends." And he goes, "I can't speak about it." And I said to him, "Well, I'll tell you what, here's my business card. It's got my name and my phone number.
Yeah.
If you ever want to be interviewed, I'd be honored to record your history." I said we could do it at my house, your house, a library, a restaurant, wherever you'd like to do it.
Yeah.
He took my card. I shook his hand. I thanked him for his service. And then I never heard from him again, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah. I think, sometimes they just can't talk about it. But, you have interviewed some really amazing, really interesting folks. And I'm just curious to know, because you have interviewed people with ties to Walt Disney, obviously, and I would love to hear the story about sort of the Canadian tie with Walt, because it's Victoria Day, and I think it would be really fun to hear that story.
Sure. So I made a few notes earlier today because I hadn't read my manuscript in a long time. But
Okay.
there was a gentleman that he went by, his name was George Maxwell Bell,
Okay.
and a lot of people just called him Max. So Max Bell.
Okay.
And when his father passed away, he inherited his dad's newspaper. He made his money selling railroad ties to the National Railway in Canada.
Oh,
And then with that money, he invested in oil, and he hit it big in the oil business. This was in the 1930s. So he
okay.
basically made his fortune. He made his fortune in oil. And
Wow.
then he bought his dad's newspaper out of bankruptcy. So he sort of became an oil and newspaper baron.
Okay.
Very down to earth guy, by all accounts, everything I've read about him. Just a really, really nice guy. Donated a lot of money to charity.
Mm.
Was very easygoing. So in 1957, he purchased a boat called the Southern Seas. He refurbished it, and then he renamed it the Campania, which is Spanish for Bell, which of course was his surname,
Oh, there
right?
you go. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a yacht that was built in 1930 in New York. It was about a 130-footer. It had
Wow.
hardwood decks, teakwood pilot house, black
Nice.
walnut in the dining room and lounge, mahogany
Hmm.
trim. The boat cost about 150 grand.
Wow.
So because of his stature in the community in Alberta, he was named the president of the Calgary Stampede in 1965. And so
Okay.
as the president, he was allowed to pick who he wanted to be the parade marshal. So he
Mm.
approached Walt Disney, and Walt Disney said yes. So Walt Disney was the parade marshal for the Calgary Stampede in 1965. And
Oh.
not only did Walt come up to the Stampede, but Walt
Hmm.
and Lillian also spent time at Max's ranch called the Okotoks, or it was in the Okotoks, which I believe is just south of
It
Calgary,
is.
Alberta.
Yeah. Yeah. I know because
Yeah.
that's where we moved from. Yeah. Oh, for crying out
Okay.
loud.
Cool.
Yeah. I love that.
So what happened was, anyone who was the parade marshal, Max gave them the offer of using his yacht for a family vacation at no charge. So at some point in time, Walt decided to take his family on vacation in 1966, and he contacted Bell, and Bell said, "Well, it's free." And Walt said, "Well, no, I'm not going to do it for free." He goes, "I want to pay for it." And
Mm.
Max said, "Well, the charter rate is $600 a day." And Walt said, "Okay, that's great, I'll pay it."
Oh.
And they had room. They had room on the boat for 8, but Walt needed 13 spaces for 13 people because he was bringing his 2 daughters, his wife, his sons-in-law, and all the grandkids.
Oh. Wow.
So the boat's captain, his name is Bill. Bill
Yeah.
said, "Well, that's fine because if there's young kids coming, we can have some people sleep on the after deck in sleeping bags, so that's not a problem."
Oh, for crying out
So
loud.
Walt and his family came up to Vancouver,
Okay.
and they departed July 1st, 1966 for a 2-week
Oh.
cruise. They had to return by the 13th of July because Bob Hope had booked. Bob Hope was going out on the boat on July
Oh.
13th.
Oh dear.
So they had the boat for about 2 weeks,
Ah.
and they went up between Vancouver Island and the mainland,
Mm-hmm.
and they visited. They went through a lot of areas and visited a lot of places. So they went to Thetis Island, Dodge Narrows, Chatterbox Falls, the Malibu Club. They spent some
Wow.
time there, an afternoon there. The Malibu Club was built for millionaires in 1946. It went
Oh.
broke.
Oh.
It was sold to a charitable organization, and they run it now as like a summer camp for underprivileged kids.
Oh my gosh.
So they spent
I was
Yeah,
just
so they spent
curious.
some time there. Then they
Yeah.
went through Princess Louisa Inlet, Hernando Island, Twin Islands, Lund, Roscoe Bay, Toby Inlet, the Glendale Cove Cannery, Knight Inlet, where they visited a First Nations village. They went through Johnston Strait, Hole in the Wall, Surge Narrows, Quadra Island, Rebecca Strait. It's really interesting because when I contacted this guy, and my contact with him was sort of serendipitous. I was talking to somebody one day,
Yeah.
and I had written something for them, and they said they didn't know I was a writer, but they commented, "Well, you're a really good writer." And I said, "Well, yeah, I write about Disney history and World War II history, blah blah blah."
Right.
And he said, "Well, you should talk to my wife because my wife has got a client that took Walt and his family on vacation."
Oh.
And so anyhow, we arranged, and I interviewed this guy. His name is Bill, and I interviewed him for about 3 or 4 hours, and it was really neat because he
Mm.
still had the boat's original logbook. And so he was
Oh.
telling me not only about vacations with Walt Disney, but also
Yeah.
vacations with Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and John Wayne and a dozen other Hollywood types. So that was really
Wow.
neat.
Oh
But
my goodness.
but
Yeah.
getting back
Yeah.
getting back to Walt, it was
Yeah.
really neat because he said one of the stories he shared with me. He said And this is what I've written down in my manuscript. It says, Walt said, "What would your impression be of a cannonball when it hit the water? How would you describe that?"
Mm.
And Bill said, "I described it as when the ball hit the water, it would create an implosion, which would drive the water down, creating a pressure, which would make the water come back to fill the void, so you'd have a big splash."
Mm-hmm.
And Walt said, "Yes, yes, yes, but how would you imitate that?" So he said, "I thought for a few minutes, and I said, well, I'd have a clear plastic pipe just under the water,
Right.
and a piston would come down and suck the water into the hole. That's the ball hitting the water. Then you'd drive the piston back up, and that would spray the water back into the air." And so he thinks that Walt took that idea back and used it in Pirates of the Caribbean.
You know what? When you were saying that, I'm like, he used that for that attraction. Oh my gosh, that
Exactly.
makes sense.
Exactly.
Oh, for crying out loud. Oh,
it was really neat because he shared a few stories. He said, they went to Alert Bay. They saw the totem poles there, including one of the largest in the world. They saw another totem pole being made for Queen Elizabeth. He took Walt or the sons-in-law out on their little skiff to do salmon fishing because, as you know, there's great salmon fishing up here.
Yeah.
And on one excursion with Walt, it was just Walt and him in the boat. They caught 12 salmon that weighed 5 pounds each, which they cooked up for dinner that evening. And he said Walt made a big deal of it when they got back to the boat and they strung the salmon up on a line on the boat, and all the grandkids and everyone was having their pictures taken by them. In another instance, a bald eagle came down right beside the boat and grabbed the fish out of the water, and Walt was really excited that he was able to see that.
Oh, wow.
He said Walt brought along shows to show at nighttime. So he couldn't remember which movies, but he brought along some movies that they watched at nighttime, as the boat was set at anchor.
Fun. Oh my
They
gosh.
had picnics on the beach with bonfires, roasted hot dogs, marshmallows on a stick for the grandkids.
Gee whiz.
One of the grandkids, and I can't remember which one, but one of them had their 9th birthday party, and then Walt and Lillian celebrated their 41st anniversary on that trip aboard the boat. One comment that I found interesting is, as you know, Walt was experiencing a lot of pain in his neck at that time because of his polo injury. So in the 1930s, Walt was a big polo player. That's another collection I have. I've got quite a few items that relate to Walt Disney's polo hobby. But the Argentinian national team came up, and Walt decided he wanted to practice with them because they were an elite squad of polo players. And while he was out on the field, the ball got smacked, and it was coming towards him, and he turned his head, and it got whacked on the back of the neck by a polo ball at high speed. And that's what caused him grief his whole life, because he went to a chiropractor, and the chiropractor did some weirdo type of manipulation, and that caused Walt to have grief the rest of his life. There was a calcium deposit, I believe, that built up on the vertebrae. But anyhow, it's interesting because that's what Walt was going into the hospital before he passed away. He was going to have neck surgery, and during all the routine tests, that's when they discovered the lung cancer. They removed the lung, and then he passed away from that. But what was interesting was the skipper, Bill guy, he mentioned that he noticed that anywhere that Walt went, he had to have like a hand railing to hold on to. And that sort of ties in with, if you look at the stories of some of the Imagineers, they said, in the last days, Walt was sort of slumped over and he would drag his feet a little bit, and that was all due to the pain that he was experiencing because of the injury to his neck.
Wow.
But it was interesting that Bill said that when Walt was on the boat, he always made sure he had a handrail to hang on to, or, he was very careful getting into the little skiff when they went salmon fishing, or when they went ashore to walk the beaches, or, that sort of thing. It's interesting because the last picture that you see at the Walt Disney Family Museum, when you go into the gallery where they talk about Walt's passing, when you enter that gallery, there's a beautiful picture of Walt sitting on a beach, and he's raising his hat in the air. That's actually taken from a piece of film that Ron Miller, Diane Disney Miller's husband, took. And Diane, they looked at that film and they decided that would be an appropriate picture of Walt at the museum. So it's really poignant because he's sitting there and he's sort of waving his hat like he's saying goodbye. In the film, he wasn't obviously saying goodbye, but in the museum, it's a good way to set the stage for that last gallery.
And I have seen that, and I did not realize that was taken on that trip. I none of the places you told me about, I've been to those islands, and I've been along there. And you know what I was thinking when you were telling me all those places? Can you imagine what the people might have thought, what they thought having Walt Disney and his family show up on their
Yeah.
on the reserve or whatever, I think
Oh yeah.
that's amazing.
I'm sure it was a hoot. I'm sure it was
Oh
exciting.
yeah.
As a matter of fact, my friend Phil Sears, he's been dealing in Walt Disney autographs for, a couple of decades now. He actually had an autograph that Walt had signed on that trip when they went ashore
Oh,
to one of these islands.
oh,
A
gee.
young girl approached him and got his autograph, and then I
Oh.
don't know if she passed away, and then another family member, or if she sold it, but anyhow, it was sold to Phil, and it was sold on his auction site.
Oh,
But
for crying out loud. You mentioned, his Diane and Sharon and the kids and their husbands on the ship. Now you got to know Diane Disney Miller quite well, didn't you? And how did that all come about?
yeah, as a Disney geek, that was one of the most exciting things that's ever
Oh,
happened to me.
I bet.
Um, my friend Jeff Curdy, some of your listeners might know Jeff Curdy. He's um, a prolific Disney author. He's written, I don't
Yes.
know, at least 30 books related to Disney history. He
Mm-hmm.
worked for the company for an extended period of time. He does a lot of guest presentations and lectures, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, he was one of three people that were named sort of like the design team that were going to come up with the ideas for the Walt Disney Family Museum. So Diane and Ron had hired him, and Paula Sigmund Lowry, who worked at the Disney Archives. She's a fantastic researcher. She's just a great all-around person. And then the late Bruce Gordon, who was an Imagineer. He actually passed away the weekend that I was going down to meet with Diane the very first time.
Oh,
He died of a heart attack.
oh dear.
But Jeff Curdy had mentioned my name to Diane and said, you should really talk to this guy named David up in Canada, because he has one of the largest collections of your father's war history, and he might be able to help us out with Gallery 6. So Gallery 6 is the gallery that looks at the studio's contributions during the war.
Yeah.
So in August of 2007, I got an email from Jeff, and he said, well, you can expect an email from Diane in the next couple of days. And of course, I just, it's like a kid in the candy
Oh
shop. And my wife's
my.
going, calm down, take a breath, take a breath. I was so excited. And it was
Yeah.
really cool because she sent me this most wonderful introductory email. And it was just her. I later learned that this is how she acted and who she was. She was just so down to earth. And it
Oh.
was an invitation to come down to San Francisco, look at the little
What?
museum that they already had set up on Gorgas in a warehouse at the Presidio, have a tour of that museum, have lunch and dinner with them, stay a couple of nights, go over to the barracks that was being renovated at the
Oh.
time. And she said,
Yeah.
I want to know if you would like to be interested in helping us. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me?
Oh my
Of course,
gosh.
I don't even have to come down to give you
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Oh.
But it was really neat. She had me down to the museum 5 or 6 or 7 times, and every time I came down, she treated me like royalty. It was just so
Oh.
cool. It was like, first class airfare. It was limo at the airport. It was
Wow.
the 4-star W hotel. It was lunch
Wow.
and dinner with her and Ron every day that I was down there. And on
Nice.
that first visit, it was really cool. It was, they canceled the meeting. It was supposed to be Bruce and Paula and Jeff and me, talking about my involvement and what I could offer, that sort of thing.
Right.
And they basically canceled the meeting, but because the airplane tickets were booked, they still had me come down. So I
Okay.
got to spend the entire couple of nights that I was there just with her and Ron. And
Oh.
it was
Gee.
amazing. We went
Oh,
to this little
David.
restaurant, and their son, Walter Elias Disney Miller, joined us. And
Right.
at that dinner, we just started talking about all these people that her dad had worked for, like Kay Kamen, the merchandising rep. And I
Right.
would just throw out names. And she said, David, this dinner was so wonderful because you mentioned all these names, and we talked about all these people that I grew up with,
Oh.
and that were my father's friends and coworkers. And she said, this has just been a really, really neat
Oh.
evening. Thank you for sharing that experience with me.
So
And that was
special.
the coolest thing. And then it just led to this really neat friendship that I had with her. And
Yeah.
we corresponded back and forth. She phoned me at home. She gave me all the phone numbers for her different residences. She
Oh.
called me asking me questions about her dad. When she
Sure.
passed away, and I wrote up a little obituary in remembrance of her, I looked, and I've got over 1,200 emails from her,
Wow.
just filled with research information. She was appreciative of anything anybody did for her, not just myself. I wasn't
Yeah.
the only one.
Right.
There were lots of other people that helped, and she was just so down to earth. She was so approachable. She was very kind. She was very generous. She always asked about my wife and kids.
Yeah.
Um, she comped us 2 trips to Disneyland in addition to the money that she paid me. And I
Oh,
always complained to her about how much she was paying me. I said, I'd be happy to do this for $20 an hour.
right.
And it's funny because the last time I had seen her alive or saw her alive was
Yeah.
in March of 2013. I'd gone down to the museum to do a guest lecture on the history of the Hyperion studio.
Right.
And while we were there, we went for a little walk around the museum, and she goes, "Oh, I want to show you the new exhibit." And it was this little tiny exhibit that they had installed, and it was detailing her mom and dad's trip to, I think it was England.
Oh, yeah.
And anyhow,
Okay.
I'd given her a copy of a magazine article that had a picture of her dad at a studio in England. I think that's what I had lent her.
Okay.
And we're standing there looking at it, and I said, Diane, you really do pay me too much money. And she goes, "Well, I really, really appreciate all that you do for me." And I said, "Yeah, but
Yeah.
you pay me too much."
Yeah.
And I'm 6 feet tall, and she was 5 foot nothing. She
Oh.
put her left arm around me, pulled me
Oh.
in for a big hug, and she looked up at me and she said, "David, shut up and take my money."
Oh.
And I just laughed, and she laughed, and I said, "Okay, if
Oh.
that's the way you want to, you know." And she
Oh.
goes, "I pay you as much as I do because I think that you're worth it." And that was just the
Oh.
biggest compliment.
Yeah.
But she was like that.
Yeah.
Most of the time when I went down, I would meet her at the museum. I
Okay.
would go from my hotel, and the next day I would meet her at the museum.
Right.
And she was always there before me. Like I never kept her waiting, but she was always there before me.
Yeah.
And what was really neat is I would walk in the front of the museum, and
Right.
she'd be standing there surrounded by people.
Right.
And she
Of
was
course.
never in a rush to get rid of people, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
She would
Yeah.
engage them in conversation, and she was
Nice.
just so appreciative of the fact that people had an interest in her father and that they were willing to come and see what they had done at the museum.
Oh.
That's just the type of person. And you know what? She did a lot of stuff that people don't know about. She paid for children to go to art school and dance school and music school. And,
Oh.
she did all
Wow.
the stuff for the school children in San Francisco to come out to the museum and try to inspire them to
Right.
become artistic or pursue their
Yeah.
artistic dreams. Like
Yeah.
she did so much for the arts community,
Oh.
But she was just
Yeah.
a wonderful person, and I miss her dearly.
Yeah.
But she was just great to be around,
Yeah.
always open to ideas. Like I said, very down to earth,
Nice.
and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to be able to hang out with her and
Yeah.
have her call me at home. It's just the coolest thing
Well,
ever.
yeah. I mean, you are so fortunate, really, to have had that kind of relationship with her. I mean, it would have been a dream to be able to chat with her and meet her. I never ever have had the opportunity yet to meet any of the Disney family per se, but I mean, I just think that I love to hear about that because I think that uh, you know the Walt Disney legacy is so massive, and it's so endearing to hear that this person, part of this huge, greater, bigger than any individual, is so welcoming, very much.
Yeah.
I think like her father in welcoming and just accepting and appreciative of so many things.
Yeah, and I wasn't the only one that she treated
Of
like
course.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not extra special in any way. She did appreciate everything that I did for her, but she
Right.
was appreciative of everyone that participated in
Right.
telling the story of her father.
Right.
And it was really cool because she was 5 years old when her dad was working on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and she had perfect recall. She could tell me
Oh,
stories about
wow.
when her dad was working on Snow White, or when she went to New York City and stayed. Kay Kamen's wife took her around New York to all the little shops and ice cream and
Oh,
lunch
gee.
and retail stores,
Wow.
and yeah, just her recall was just amazing.
That is
Absolutely
amazing because I'm starting to think back. So what I remember when I was 5, I mean, I mean, I can remember some, but details would be kind of hard to grasp. I think that's really neat that
Yeah,
she could
yeah,
do that.
yeah.
Wow. I mean, I know you have some books out there, and I would like to know about them because I want people to know where they can find more information about what your work has taken you over the years. And can you tell us the titles and where people can find them.
Sure, I would love to share that with you and
Okay.
your listeners. So I
Okay.
wrote a book initially called Tunes at War, which detailed the history of the Disney studio during World War II,
Okay.
and then I put out sort of a second edition under a different name. So the name of the book, as it stands right now, it's called Service with Character,
Okay.
and it's available on Amazon.
All right.
There's a print version and an ebook version. Now, it
Okay.
says in the print version description that there are no pictures in the print version because I could not get permission from the Disney company to use any
Oh,
images.
okay.
They would not allow me. So people give me a low star rating because there's no pictures in the book. So if you buy the print
Oh,
version of the book,
right.
be aware that there are no pictures in the book. I was
Okay.
not allowed to use any.
Right.
However, there are pictures in the ebook version. There's about 350 photographs in the
Oh,
ebook.
wow. Okay. That's
So
good
what I
to know.
tried to do is my publisher sets the price that they're going to sell the book for, but because I published the ebook on my own, I've kept the price of the ebook relatively low.
Okay.
So if people wanted to buy the ebook and the print version, so they could have the print version to put on their shelf,
Right.
and then they could have the ebook to look at the pictures.
Right.
I don't make any money on the ebook
Right.
because there's so many files. There's 350 files. Amazon charges me a higher fee to deliver the book to your e-device.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
I think I make 50 cents or $1,
Yeah.
something like that on the ebook.
Yeah.
So there's that
Oh,
one,
okay.
and then my other book is called In the Service of the Red Cross,
Oh,
and that book is a book that details Walt's adventures as a volunteer driver with the Red Cross at the end of World War One. And that
okay.
book is really cool because I was able to find 60 pieces of correspondence between Walt Disney and the lady that ran the Red Cross canteen that he served at for
Wow.
most of his 10 months overseas at Neufchâteau, France.
Wow. Okay.
So I was able to find the 60 letters that they started exchanging between them, and their friendship lasted from 1931 until she passed away in 1943. And she
Oh,
actually came out and visited the studio, and she has a connection to Blackjack Pershing's sister. Blackjack Pershing was in charge of the Allied Expeditionary Force, or the American
wow.
Expeditionary Force
Right.
in
Yeah.
Europe during the war, which is really neat because Walt Disney got a book, got his memoirs signed, Pershing signed memoirs, and gave them to Walt, and it was through his connection with the lady that ran the canteen. So that was a really cool
Oh.
angle.
Oh, my goodness.
But that book is really neat because Diane Disney Miller gave me permission to use any parts of the Pete Martin interview that I wanted to use. So I have CDs with over 20 hours of interview done in
Wow.
1956 with Pete Martin and Walt
Wow.
Disney.
Oh,
And so there's a lot of stories. Some of them have been told in the past, but
right.
I expand on them.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
also in the book, through my friend Phil Sears that I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
I came into possession, and he at the same time, sort of serendipitously, at the same time came into possession of photographs relating to Walt Disney's time in France at the end of World War One.
Oh,
So I
wow.
had a whole bunch of pictures, and he had a whole bunch of pictures and postcards that Walt had sent home, and a service flag, and
Wow.
photographs that Walt had taken while in France. So it's really cool
Wow.
because the book contains about 6 or 7 pictures of Walt in uniform that have never been published anywhere before, in addition to some, and the pictures aren't the best of the artwork, but Walt also created a scrapbook filled with artwork that he sent to his girlfriend. And so I've got pictures of some of the pages of that artwork in the book as well. So
Oh,
there is some new information in there. I also I found some correspondence related to Roy Disney's time in the Navy, and so I've
oh,
included that in the book as well.
oh, cool.
So it's a neat book. It's got a lot of information that's never been published and a lot of photos that have never been published before.
Wow.
So
Wow.
both of those books are available on Amazon, ebook
Okay.
and print version. I've
Okay.
got another book coming out later this year, depending on the pandemic. It's on Disney artist Hank Porter. Walt
Oh,
Disney
okay.
referred to him as a one-man art department. So
Yeah.
he did the Snow White and Pinocchio newspaper strips. He created 80% of the 1,200 combat insignia during the war. He did
Wow.
movie poster artwork. He did magazine artwork. He signed Walt Disney's name on non-legal documents.
Oh, wow.
He just created corporate Christmas cards. He created presentation artwork. So that book is going to be neat because it is sanctioned by the Disney company, and it
Okay.
will have somewhere between 150 and 200 photographs in it.
Oh,
So that'll
fantastic.
be published later this year through the Hyperion Historical Association.
Right.
And then I've got another book I'm waiting for my publisher to come through on. It's a manuscript that details all of Walt's 620 plus personal awards.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
I break down all of his awards by category. So,
Right.
for instance, the environment, philanthropic, trade, community, educational. I break it down, and then I detail when he got the award, who gave it to him, why they gave it to him, and then
Oh,
if
my
I've been able
goodness.
to find any remarks or correspondence that Walt did related to getting that award,
Yeah.
I've included that in the manuscript as well. I think the
Wow.
manuscript it runs about 150,000 words or something.
Wow.
It's
That's
huge.
going to be big.
Absolutely
Yeah,
huge.
yeah, yeah. Oh, my goodness. Well,
And then I've done
yeah,
and
go
then I've
ahead.
done and then I've done research on Kay Kamen, Disney's merchandising rep, and I've
Right.
done I'm partway through a manuscript. I've been researching the history of the Hyperion studio for about 10 years. And
Uh,
once my Hank Porter book is done, I'm going to redouble my efforts to get that done as well. So
so
lots of projects.
when do you have time to work?
Well, with this pandemic, I'm actually fortunate because I can work at home. So that's cut out a
Okay.
2-hour commute from my day.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
but
Good for
usually
you.
I get about, normally I would get 6 or 7 hours of sleep and, try to spend quality time with my wife and 3 kids and
Yeah.
then, try to devote some time to the hobby as well. It's a juggling
Yeah.
act.
Right. Of course it is. That is absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to pick up some of your stuff. And next time I'm north of here, which is kind of neat. You're only actually a couple hours from me. I'll have to take a peek at some of your collections sometime because I think it's
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think it just touched me so deeply that just the fact that you're holding this history and you have so much. There's so much depth, and what's so wonderful is everybody. Walt Disney, they know the parks, they know the movies, the music, the food, all that. But there was so much more, to the man, which you are discovering all the time. And I just want to thank you, David, so much for taking the time on this holiday evening for you and sharing your information with us. It's just absolutely fantastic, and I'm so glad that you had a neighbor like you did that took you around to the
Yeah,
different places and
yeah.
really inspired you to pursue your interest in not only Disney artifacts but the war years. I think it's like a treasure hunt, isn't it, when you're trying to uncover information or when you come upon things
Well,
that
you know
yeah.
what, it's exciting not only to find the artifact, but then to put that artifact in context,
Yeah.
its place in history. Find out why it was created, who created
Right.
it, what was the purpose for creating it.
Yeah.
That's just as exciting as finding the artifact because an artifact is just something until you have a story to go with it. It's
Exactly.
just a piece of
Exactly.
something,
Yeah.
and it looks pretty and it looks nice, but what I find even more exciting is to attach a story to that
Oh, for
item. Why
sure.
was it made? Who made it? Where was
Right.
it made? What was its purpose?
Yeah.
You
No,
know.
I love it. I
Can I
mean,
share? Can I share my 2 Facebook pages
oh,
with people
yes,
and my
please,
email
please.
address if they
Yes,
want to get in
please.
touch with me?
Sure. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So if people want to learn more about Disney and World War II, I run a Facebook group called Disney and the War. So I post a lot of artifacts from my collection on that site, and we just have a discussion. People add things that they come across as well. And then I'm also the co-administrator for the Facebook group. It all started with Walt Disney. And so we post historical stuff and new stuff. I post a lot of the historical stuff there, from the 30s and 40s. And my friend Leo Holzer, shout out to him. He
Yeah.
basically manages that website on his own.
Okay.
He contributes a lot of stuff there. And then if
Yeah.
people have any questions or want to contact me directly, feel free. My email address is Walt Disney Research. No spaces, dots, or underscores, all one word, Walt Disney Research @yahoo.com. So if anybody wants to contact me, by all means, they certainly can.
Yeah, that's wonderful because they might have some information for you and or be looking for some information or somehow connect that way. That's wonderful. Thank you again so much, David. Gosh, when we first chatted, we chatted for a few hours because you're the type of person we could talk forever about things for sure. But I just want to thank you again.
If you ever want to have me back, by all means, you know what,
I
Remembrance Day, Armistice Day, we could talk about Walton and, you know, overseas for 10 months as a
I would love that.
sixteen-year-old kid.
Yeah, I would love that. You
And
know
he, you
what?
know,
Yeah, as you were talking, I'm like, I got to get you back on because we have to talk about this. We have to talk about that. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Okay.
I could talk, as you know, I could talk your ear off for hours.
I know.
I think our first conversation lasted about 4.5 hours.
I know. I know. I loved every minute of it
Great,
too. Yeah. All
great,
right.
and I did too. It's great to talk shop.
Yes, sure is. Well, listen, you take care, and we'll see you again either through our Disneyana Club or maybe north of the border here. And as I said, just will be well. Have a great week, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much, and stay well, be healthy, and the same to all your listeners as well. Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. All right, take care.
Okay,
Bye
bye bye
bye.
now. Bye bye.
No, that is, that is so amazing that his, not only his relationship with Diane, but all the things that he found out throughout his years of research. And I just think it's just incredible how we think we know Walt Disney, but we really, there's so much more to the man to hear. For all of my listeners there, I just want to let you know that the full recorded version will be up momentarily today, so you can hear the whole interview uninterrupted. And just bear with us, and that will be up momentarily, as I said, so you can hear the whole thing without any little glitches or anything of that sort. But I just want to thank you guys all for listening today, and check out his Facebook page. It's really, really neat, actually. I go on there once in a while, and he was mentioning a fellow named Jeff Curdy. And as a matter of fact, Jeff is going to be my guest next week on the Positively Disney podcast. So for now, guys, please stay safe, be well, and have an absolutely wonderful week. And we will see you next week. And again, the playback of the show will be up momentarily. You can listen to the whole thing through if you are joining us a little late tonight. For now, take care. Goodbye.